Hi, I'm Tom R., pastor at Village Church, and I'm glad to welcome you to this session of Village Connect. This is the second lesson in our course on letters from prison, and I want to invite you to find Philippians, the second chapter, and read the first 18 verses of Philippians chapter 2, Paul's letter of joy. Read that together, and when you finish, come back and we'll get the conversation started. So in this chapter, Paul encourages the church to make my joy complete, be of the same mind. So there's an encouragement here that to be of the same mind is to demonstrate some unity in the church. This is very important to Paul. The unity of the church is lifted up in every letter that he writes. And that tells us a couple of things. One is that there's something essential about Christian faith that's revealed in our unity, in our relationship with one another. There's something that bears witness to the fact that we are Christian. The second thing is that because it's in every letter, it's obviously pretty difficult for the church to be in unity, and it's been that way for a long time. But here Paul says, make my joy complete, be of the same mind. Now that sounds like Paul is encouraging us to think alike, to think the same things. And I don't know your experience, but my experience is the church has never been a community that thinks alike. We just don't. Human beings, we don't all think the same way. And it sounds like what he's saying is that there's a particular thought or collection of thoughts that we need to have in order to be the church. But the Greek word really is not thoughts as much as it is mindset or orientation. He's saying, have the same orientation of mind, of your spirit toward one another. And what's that mindset? Well, he describes it. It's a mindset of humility. He says, consider others better than yourself. Consider the needs of others. And then he says, have the same mind that you have in Christ Jesus, who did not account equality with God as something to be exploited. He emptied himself. He humbled himself. That's the mind of Christ. That's the mind that Paul describes. What he's encouraging the church, he says our unity depends on our humility. And humility is a tricky thing. Humility is, I think we tend to think of humility as a way we think of ourselves, of not lifting ourselves up too much, of keeping our thoughts about ourselves restrained, not boastful. And I understand they tell an old story that a church identified the most humble man in their congregation, and they gave him a pen to commemorate his humility. And then later they took it away from him because he wore it. I think that we think of humility is I can't think about myself in certain ways. But I think that's got it backwards. I don't think humility is thinking about ourselves at all. I think humility is the fruit that results when we see honor and value and beauty in someone else. When we see the good in someone else, the byproduct is we are humbled. And it's not because we think less of ourselves. It's because we think so much of someone else. When I was in middle school, I remember the first time I ever met someone that I had seen on TV. It was a Major League ball player for the Atlanta Braves. He stayed in our home for a couple of months one season, into my 8th grade summer into my 9th grade year. He He lived with us. His name was Johnny Oates. And I remember the night that he came to our house the first time. We sat in our little kitchen table, my dad and me and Johnny Oates, and we talked baseball. We talked about what it was like to play on the same team with Hank Aaron and what it was like to catch Phil Necro's knuckleball. And we talked about baseball. And then my dad turned into my dad, and he said, John, you know, Tom here's a pretty good ball player. He and Joe Barnes, they turned a double play in church league softball last week, and I was so humiliated. I was like, Dad, stop. No, I didn't want to talk about my double play in baseball. Now, I tell you the truth, if anybody else had been sitting at the table, if you've been there, I'd be glad to tell you about it right now. Actually, it's a pretty good play, actually. But I didn't want to talk about it. Why? Not because I thought less of myself, but because I was inspired by who was sitting at my kitchen table. I think that is a Christ-like humility. Paul says Christ humbled himself and came to live and walk where you and I walk, to be part of this human world. Christ humbled himself. It's not because he thought less of himself. No, he humbled himself because he loves you, because of the value he sees in you. Humility is not how we think of ourselves. Humility is the fruit that results when we see the beauty, the value in the neighbor.